Hi everyone and welcome back to Newegg TV. My name is Paul and once again we have a special guest in the studio. This is Bill, the server guy from Intel. How's it going, Bill?
Hey, it's great, Paul. Thanks.
And thank you very much for stopping by today. What we're here to share with all you folks is we have a server build right here. We're going to be featuring the newest Xeon E3-1230 series processor. It is built on the Ivy Bridge microarchitecture that Intel has recently released. So you guys might be familiar with the third generation Intel Core processors, which were released recently and have gotten a lot of positive feedback. Well, there's the Xeon side of that, which is the server version of those processors. A few differences between the two, but essentially our goal here today is to set up a small footprint, also a small size-wise server for you guys. So it's going to be ideal for home use or maybe a small business, and we'll share some of the benefits of the platform as well as the new Ivy Bridge-based Xeon processor. Did I cover everything?
I think you got it.
Okay, so from there, let's go ahead and go over all of our parts that we have. So the centerpiece of our build here is our processor, and again, this is an Intel Xeon E3 processor. It's actually the E3-1230 V2. And Xeon, again, is sort of the counterpart to the Core series of processors that Intel came out with. And this particular one uses the Ivy Bridge microarchitecture, 22 nanometer manufacturing process. And if we can pause for just a moment to sort of dissect the actual naming scheme for this. So E3, first off, our customers, our viewers might be familiar with the Core i3, i5, and i7. For the Xeons, it's E3, E5, and E7. And moving on from there, we have 1235 V2. So what does the 1 indicate in the 1235?
So after the dash,
dash.
you get a 1 or in some cases a 2 or a 4 or sometimes even an 8. It refers to what we call the wayness, or the number of sockets in the system. So in this case we have a 1200. It starts with one socket. Let's say an E5 2600 2-socket, E5 4600 4-socket, and so on.
So designed for servers that have multiple processors in them?
In the case of 2, 4, and 8, yes.
Yeah, yes, but this one here, 1, so single
exactly.
processor. The 2 then would indicate?
And that refers to the actual socket, the socket type. And again, without a translation table, I can't tell you all the options, but I can tell you that this is an LGA 1155. So the 2 refers to the 1155 socket. Okay,
and then at the end we have a 35. I understand it could also be a 30.
Yeah, that's correct. So the SKU number, the last 2 numbers, we start with an E3 1220, I believe it is, the first SKU, and it goes all the way up to a 1290. The even numbers, 20, 30, 40, 50, those are server parts. They don't have the graphics capability enabled on the processor.
Okay.
The parts that end in 5, like our 1235, those have graphics engines enabled on the processor. As compared to, for example, the desktop parts, we actually have a little bit more graphics hardware on the Xeon parts, so you should get a little bit better performance.
Okay, and then finally we have a V2 at the end, and you were actually here last year. We had a 1230, that was a Sandy Bridge part. Now we have the V2, and that is simply indicating it's an Ivy Bridge.
And it turns out that the V2 there at the end is going to be one of the most important parts of the model code, because it tells you what generation product you're working with. It used to be that it was plain and simple. It was a 5500 or a 5600. Now you've got to look there at the end. So last year we had the plain and simple 1230. That was a Sandy Bridge, and now we're talking about a V2, which is Ivy Bridge. And yes, there will be a V3. So
it is the Ivy Bridge version that we have here, the V2, so that's what you guys are going to want to go with if you're getting the newest processor, and there are some benefits to that we're going to be discussing. With that said, let's go ahead and move on and talk about the rest of the hardware. We have an in-win case and power supply right here, so a small form factor case. That is to fit our motherboard right here, which is this Intel server board. It's a mini ITX server board. It's the tiniest server board I've ever seen, because I don't work with a lot of server parts. I'm sure server guys have seen a lot of those. We actually have a pretty high-end actual hard drive here for storage. This is a Seagate Constellation Series ES2. This is designed for enterprise storage use. So this is one of those pieces of hardware where if you're working with really sensitive data, you probably want to go with an enterprise drive such as this. If you're looking to save a little bit on the build, any sort of mainstream drive that you might get for a typical system would also work. But for our purposes, we got the Seagate Constellation. We also have a pretty basic DVD burner here from Plexstar. We have some Kingston server grade memory here, and that is important that you get the ECC memory
Correct.
when you're going with the server, because it has error correction. That's for enhanced reliability, which is sort of the hallmark of server builds in general. And then finally, we're going to be going with Windows Small Business Server 2011 Essentials, so we can get an operating system and get this whole build up and running. I think that covers it for our hardware. Bill and I are now going to assemble all of this hardware, and it's going to take us a while, but for you guys, it's just going to take a few seconds. And we're back. Our server is up and running. Hopefully you guys caught a fair amount of the build process in our little montage. But if you guys do want a full tutorial on how to build a computer, you can check out our tutorials section on our Newegg TV YouTube channel, where we have a full guide building, for instance, this type of server. Not too much different than building a typical home PC or gaming computer. So that being said, we spared you guys the process of the Windows Home Server Essentials installation, but it's now up and running. Just to give you a really quick look here, here's the server manager functions, so you can see a lot of the stuff about the server that you've set up. Again, we haven't really gone through the entire setup of this, but you also have a dashboard here that's pretty user-friendly, so you can access stuff like the computers on the networks, folders, and hard drives, do stuff, backup tasks like server backup and remote web access. Those are all features of Small Business Server 2011. You guys can check that out if you're interested. That's not necessarily what this video is about, although it is the operating system that we're running. What we're here to talk about is the hardware. So, Bill, let's first talk about this as a server versus, say, a home computer that somebody might use. Because a lot of people will take an old computer, they'll say, I want to set this up as a server. So, what is the, say, give and take of that particular situation?
As simply as I can put it, if you or your customer is running a business, and part of their business is running on a server, a garage running their, their customer invoicing system, for example, it just makes sense that we need to take reasonable precautions to make sure that that system doesn't go down, and hence our business doesn't go down for any period of time. Or if, heaven forbid, it does go down, that we can actually recover from that failure. And that, in a nutshell, is the difference. As opposed to maybe focusing on performance, we want to focus on reliability.
So it's really particular if you're going to be doing this in a small business situation. You want to make sure your data is secure. You want to make sure, like you said, if you have that situation where something fails, you have the backup necessary and in place to take care of whatever problems might occur. All right, so let's talk about specifically the processor that we have in this one, because it is a new series of processors from Intel, the Xeon E3-1230 V2 that we have in here. And what are some of the key features of this?
As compared to the previous generation, the V2, the Ivy Bridge, brings a little bit more performance, a little bit more than up to 30% more performance compared to the previous generation. If you're using an older system, maybe a dual-core or single-core system, the performance increase that you'll see has got to be in the neighborhood of 4 or 5x. Mm-hmm. The big deal with Ivy Bridge, of course, is that we've moved to 22 nanometer. Usually with the die shrink comes some power efficiency, mm-hmm. and again, we'll see a little bit more than 30% improvement in power efficiency, depending on your application.
So both power efficiency and, like you said, performance. I know, just looking at some recent numbers, I know I'm going to be quoting desktop performance here, but at the same time, anything, say, LGA 775 and prior, the performance jumps you get by going up to any core-based system, especially Sandy Bridge or even now Ivy Bridge,
right.
It's night and day difference. That said, let's talk about maybe the server board we have in here. Yeah,
the server board is unique in that this is the first time we've done a mini ITX system. Mm-hmm. You'll see these used in what we call embedded applications, a small kiosk system or maybe a home theater system. Again, this is a system that's built around the concept of reliability, 24/7 validation, server workload validation, It's simply in a mini ITX form factor.
So it's something that you can be sure that you can keep on all the time, so you always have access to the data, and you are sure that the components being used in the system, you know, they're never going to fail even though they're running all the time, even though they're running, say, at higher temperatures for a longer period of time?
Yes, and there are a couple of nice features that you won't see on a desktop board, at least in all cases. For example, dual gigabit ports, manageability capabilities that you won't see on a desktop system.
And then other features of servers, for example, the memory. I know we have ECC memory that's typically not available in a typical desktop.
Correct. ECC memory in the Intel product line, you get ECC support with Xeon processors. You don't get that with Core processors. Okay. Error correcting code, obviously, we're eliminating data corruption. At least single bit data errors can be corrected. And you know, potential, in the old days they were blue screens, but you know, corruption in the instruction set of the of data in the processor and in memory. ECC is there to protect that.
And I was mentioning when we took the board out of the box, it was the smallest server board that I had ever seen, but you guys will probably notice just right here in this form factor. I mean, we use sort of maybe a little bit wider than a shoebox build that we have going. It stays relatively quiet, hasn't gotten very warm at all up to this point. And another question a lot of folks might have is when you're looking at building a system like this, and they say, well, you know, I have these desktop parts, and the desktop parts might be a better value if they're looking strictly at a price you know, comparison between the two. But you do get, as you were mentioning, a lot of those extra error correction features, a lot of the data security features, as well as the just validation of using the hardware for an extended period of time.
Yeah, I mean, and again, those are critical things when you talk about a server. We're talking about reliability. Let's just talk about hard drives for a second. A consumer level hard drive may only be designed for a duty cycle of 6 to 8 hours a day. If you spin that up for 24/7 for 6 months, we've seen situations where literally the lubrication in the main bearings and the motor spin out.
Oh, really?
So after about 6 months, the drive fails. The frustrating thing is that if you leave it sit on a shelf for a few days, the lubrication creeps back in and it works again.
Oh, okay.
But it's a very frustrating situation, and you don't see that when you move to an enterprise class product.
So it's really just a matter of making sure that the hardware, it's a different type of use than you get with a desktop.
Exactly.
You might sit at a desktop for a few hours a day in the evening, or you know, you might log in remotely from somewhere, but a server, it's got to be on, it's got to be accessible at all times.
Think about your doctor's office or any business. Again, I use the example of you know, a corner garage. There's a guy who from 7 in the morning till 6 at night, he's got to be up and running. He's got to be able to service the customers that walk in the door. He's got to be able to pull up their records, got to print out invoices, got to take payments. If that server goes down, his business is done for the day until he can get another server running. So reliability is key for folks like this. And
really, it's not that much of a price increase. I know you had made a short list. We can probably take a look at that list right now, just so we can go down the price difference for getting this type of hardware, server-based hardware, as opposed to sort of a comparable desktop.
In round numbers for this build, I think we were looking at about $275 difference between a comparable desktop, and we're talking about a Core i5 processor at about the same frequency, a similar motherboard, similar in size, similar in features, a lower-end disk drive, and memory that doesn't support ECC. Now, $275. If we're talking about a desktop system that, you know, maybe it's less than $1,000, yeah, that's a lot of money. But let's look at it another way. If you've got a system that fails, you've got a hard drive that crashes, it's going to cost you at least that $275 if you're lucky to recover that data. If you've got to send that data off to a lab to have the drive taken apart for recovery, we're talking thousands of dollars. $275 is cheap insurance.
Oh yeah. So there you have it, just the price differences in general. Another just feature of, it's been with the Xeon for a while now, but just since we have the 1235 SKU in here, is that you don't need a video card. So you sort of remove that cost from the equation as well.
In the with the 1235 or any of the E3 processors that end in a 5, if you pair it up with a motherboard that has the C206 chipset, you've got to be real careful about choosing the right chipset. You pair those things up, and you'll get actually very good video performance. For an entry or mid-range workstation, You don't necessarily need a high-end graphics card in those applications. The onboard graphics will do just fine for you.
Now, one other thing to note, Bill, is that I was sort of lauding this system we've set up because it has a small footprint. However, servers are often used for a lot of storage. So if you are looking for something for home use or for a very small business, you have a good amount of storage available in here. But are there some other chassis you might recommend that have some other features?
I don't have any specific chassis off the top of my head, but I can say with this particular box, size is obviously a consideration when we put it together. It's a very small, very attractive form factor. Would fit nicely in a corner closet, so to speak, if you don't want something that's not particularly attractive or fairly large. Usually, though, I don't recommend you build a server unless you at least have 2 drives in a RAID mirror configuration, and we couldn't do that in this particular case. So if you wanted something that's small, there's 2 or 3 chassis that we can find on your website. We're looking for, again, a mini ITX form factor, and you can get something a little bit bigger, but it's big enough to put a couple of drives in. If you need storage, there's a couple of different routes. We can go off-board to a network attached storage. We can use a USB device plugged into the back, or simply go to just a bigger box that we can put 4 or 6 drives in.
Okay, so another few options out there for any of you folks at home might be looking to put together a system similar to this one. And I think that is going to wrap it up for this video. So once again, I want to say a huge thank you to Bill the Server Guy for stopping by today.
Thanks a lot, I appreciate it.
And once again, this has been the Intel Xeon line. This has been the E3-1230 V2 processor that we were sharing with you, but a lot of this does cover a lot of the processors, the V2 processors, Ivy Bridge based in the Xeon line. Also covered the S1200KP Intel Mini ITX server motherboard. So I want to say a big thank you to all of you guys for watching today's video. If you want to find some more videos, you can check out our Newegg YouTube channel. I'm Paul with Newegg TV. This has been Bill with Intel, and we'll see you all next time on Newegg TV.